60s, there was a civil war that happened. It resulted in the South losing the Civil War. But what if in the end of the day, because if you do not know about historical presidents, every like 80 years, there's always some crazy event that happens. It's like every 60 years. The last time it was World War II. The last time it was like around World War II or something. And basically, like every 60 years in America also has like something that happens like every 60 years. And both of those things are going to collide in the 2020s. The 2020s is going to be probably one of the worst decades in American history, according to history. We. For example, they have a thing that is like every 80 years. Last time it was World War II, and the other times it was like the really bad economy. Like every 40 years, America faces a crisis or something, or the world faces a crisis. Okay, but both America is going to be facing both of them. So yeah, 50% of Americans believe a civil war might happen. Considering how America has basically came now that was during the Civil War. You have stuff like Taz popping up. You have theories being floated around, like the Great Replacement theory and stuff. You have censorship. You have a really low approval rating of the government. You also have both political parties basically splitting from a unity party into two different political parties. Well, I actually think that's actually a good thing, not a bad thing, because at least the political parties actually stand for something. It isn't the same political party, but well, that's right or wrong. I made a scenario about what if a civil war happened after January 6th. January 6th, me and a lot of people are actually scared that a actual civil war might happen, but we're still here today and there's still no civil war. I think a second civil war will be one of the worst humanitarian crises in world history. So if a civil war happened, a lot of people would flee to Mexico and Canada as asylum seekers. I think most of the people who are crossing the border will probably say, why am I going to a war zone now? Because that's what basically will be a civil war, will be a war zone. And this is the map by 2020 by county, which political party would win. I do not think it'll be whole states fighting each other. I think it'll be very, very similar to the Colombian Civil War that lasted a whole 10 years. It will be between the rural counties and the cities. And basically, yeah, California. Yeah, because even places like California still have Republican areas in the state. Texas is mostly Republican, And we have several issues that, of course, I think could cause it. The overturning of Roe v. Wade. A lot of liberals are very, very angry and very, very pissed off that Roe v. Wade, especially if gay marriage gets overturned next. Liberals might get furious about that one. And also, the illegal immigration crisis may start a civil war. The illegal immigration crisis is one of the biggest crises in American history. You also have an inflation crisis. You also have one of the worst economies. You also have an economic collapse that may be happening. And countries where economic collapse usually happens fall into literal chaos. Venezuela is an example of this. Venezuela has literally fallen into chaos and basically a civil war ever since Venezuela, collapsed, as an economy. And of course, some of the civil wars have been basically because of economic collapse and economic failure of a country. And yeah, I understand who would probably win, and if a civil war happens in the next 10 decades, the side that controls the food, that controls the energy, that controls the water, that controls all of the things, would likely win. As well. They would likely win in the Civil War, but I think that a lot of people would die. There would be, especially because considering it's the cities versus the country. The cities have a lot of people. Okay? For example, Chicago has 3 million people. And since every city votes blue, that means Republicans, which would be for example, the state of Illinois, all these blue enclaves will easily be taken, which means Republicans can easily just starve out Chicago and attrition Chicago, which is basically a seeds as well. And most of the inland cities would basically be starved, and hundreds of thousands would die in a thing like that. I think cities like LA and New York would be much easier to get supplies because they can just request foreign food in plants. But USA basically feeds itself, which would be a problem. I think also border communities would be very heavily affected. I think a lot of people in these communities would likely flee as well. Considering that in the Syrian civil war, around 3 to 4 million Syrians fled the civil war, and millions of Ukrainians are fleeing the Ukraine war. I expect a lot of people in the southern communities to flee to Mexico, though, because the Mexico border will be largely undefended, which means Mexico would have its border crisis, literally its own border crisis, because of the Civil War. And I would be surprised if millions of Americans flee to Mexico, and I wouldn't be surprised if millions of people would also flee to Canada as well, mostly from New England, New York, and Baltimore as well. I would also be surprised if people flee, areas like this part of Florida to places like Cuba and Haiti seeking asylum in South America. Gah. And, yeah. I also like how in this map, Washington doesn't have anything decided. But yeah, it would be one of the worst humanitarian crises in history. I think it would be one of the worst wars in all of history if you really think about I think millions would die in the second U.S. Civil War. The first U.S. Civil War, around 600,000 people died. So how many people died in the U.S. Civil War? So around 864,000 casualties. 800,000 casualties on both sides. So in the first Civil War, 1.6 million people were dead. Okay. 1.6 million people were killed in the Civil War. Okay. And now we're talking about a Civil War with America having way more people. And the American population has been divided. Not as badly as the Civil War, but really divided. Did as well. And I think also the fact, I think the liberals would lose basically based off the fact that they have less guns training and less guns, because also the liberals are against guns, and I think the conservatives would also be able to build an army pretty fast, way faster than, of course, liberals as well. I think areas like the Chicagoland area would also be some of the worst areas in the Civil War as well. So, and I think probably the worst battle in the Civil War would be probably the Battle of New York as well. So who would win in the Second Civil War? Well, it is most likely that the Europeans, America's European allies may support the Civil War in Canada, but it may not be enough. Europe is already going through a fuel and food crisis. Who knows how long the Ukrainian war will go on for? So, I think Europe has its hands full of the Ukrainian war. Also, I think a war between Taiwan and China would really use the Second Civil War to basically invade Taiwan. That would basically say, hey, America is fighting against itself. Invade Taiwan as well. And I think Mexico and Canada will be overwhelmed with asylum seekers, because that it wouldn't be funny at this point. I think a majority of asylum seekers will be sent to Central America. That's because there's more people on the border with Mexico than there are people on the border with Canada, simply because it's way warmer than it is now as well. I wouldn't be surprised if a total of 10 million people flee to Mexico and another 2 to 3 million people flee to Canada. Also, other hundreds of thousands flee to Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, which would probably become an independent country at this point, and also Central America and South America, and also hundreds of people also be trying to flee to Europe and Asia and Australia and New Zealand as well. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans would win. Again, a lot of the Democrat districts are landlocked, and being landlocked isn't a really good thing. That landlocked means you have no access to the sea, which most Democrat counties are landlocked. A lot of Republican counties are landlocked too, but Republican counties are more connected than they are the Democrat counties, which makes it pretty hard. I think the Democrats will be able to put up a front in Oregon, Washington, California, New England, and through Baltimore, but I think those will be the areas of the real of the Democratic resistance. If around 1.8 million people died in the first Civil War, or I think it's around 1.6 million. If 1.7 million people died in the first Civil War, a second Civil War would be way worse in terms of casualties. I think around 20 million people plus would probably die in the Second Civil War. Again, America has around 330 million people. I think America's population is going to drop massively to around 290 million people. Mostly people fleeing the country and mostly casualties from the war. Which means America's population will drop by 40 million yen. And considering that I think the Republicans will probably win at the end, considering the fact that the Democrats really only have two areas of resistance: the New York, New England area, and Baltimore area, and North Virginia. Those are the areas of main resistance. Of course, Delaware as well, and Pennsylvania, and of course California and the West Coast, which are the only two areas. Again, most of the Democrats are isolated and landlocked, which is not a good thing. And even then, a few of the coastal Democrat counties like Miami-Dade also has a large portion of Republicans in it as well. Which means I would still stand by the whole Republicans reign, even in the first Civil War. The Democrats, I don't think, have a chance of winning. I think a civil war like this could last a decade or so, which would end the age of the chaos of the United States. Considering the fact that historical precedent say that something very bad will happen in the United States in the 2020s, I would be so surprised if a civil war comes. So if people are scared of a civil war, I would suggest packing your bags to Canada or Mexico right now to avoid it, because both parties are going to draft people for the civil war. And yeah, I think conservatives also have a leg up, considering the fact that the Democratic Party also has way less masculinity, with the exception of Black and Latino Democrats as well. And also, I would be surprised if some very bad things the Democrats would do. Yeah, like using minorities as putting them in the front lines while they sit in the back or something like that. But yeah, a lot of people would probably flee America, and America would basically become under a Republican rule. The Democrats would likely be in government and exile if the Republicans win. I don't think they would be. I think they would operate in like Canada or something or thing. Under this Republican-led government, I would expect a lot of the Republican agenda to be passed after the past Civil War. And if the Republicans are already the ruling party, expect more and more Republican things to be passed. For example, banning gay marriage and stuff like that. And America will return back to a traditionalist society as well. I would also expect the birth rate of this America to go up of a Republican-led America go up as well. For example, Hungary's birth rate policies have really helped the country go from basically having no kids to at least having some kids as well. And yeah. But I think there was a 50-50 chance in this decade a civil war happened. But at this current point, as the rate we're going, read as well. With big tech such as abortion being bad, a lot, a large amount of a large foreign-born population, which a lot of Republicans don't like, and as well. I also think in the Civil War, a lot of these people who were foreign-born will likely leave the country back to their own country. Again, they came to America to have a better life, and now America literally became a war zone. So I would be surprised if a lot of them try to leave as well. Well, considering the fact that they're basically in a war zone as well. For example, countries like Syria as well. You saw a lot of people leave Syria as well. I think it would also be the case in a place like China. Like for example, China had a civil war. It was pretty bad. Or if South Africa had a civil war, which it likely will in the next coming decades, I would be surprised if a lot of the foreign-born population leaves it as well. Because again, a lot of the foreign-born population came to this country to escape either poverty, to escape, you know, crime, to escape, civil war, like of Syrian immigrants, and they probably wouldn't want to be in this country and seek asylum in other countries like Mexico, Canada, Europe, and of course South America. Probably every country around the world they would seek asylum to. Yes, even China would even have people from America seeking asylum. You always start to see this with Russia and Ukraine. A lot of Russians are trying to seek asylum in other countries to escape the draft. A lot of Ukrainians are seeking asylum in Europe to escape the war. So yeah, an American Civil War would probably be one of the worst wars in all of history. I think at the low point there'll be around 10 million deaths, and at the high point, and the war goes on for a long time, and there's mass starvation at the cities, there could be up to 40 million dead in a civil war, and around 20 million fled. That means America's population at that point would reduce to 250 million yen as well. Well, so yeah. And also American Civil War also literally collapsed the entire economy. And if the economy does collapse next year in 2023, there's a high chance the Civil War might be imminent. Of course, a Civil War literally almost started in the Great Depression. And America was at its worst since the Civil War during the Great Depression because everybody was getting economically worse. The economy is basically, something that really doesn't in the Civil War happen. If there was an economic collapse after Christmas, which a lot of people are saying there will be, a lot of financial people are saying there will be, well, it will be one of the worst catastrophes in American history if a Civil War happens. And also, so you would see if you see it's like a Great Depression. I think and also America has a debt crisis. It has a lot of crises that's going on, and I think all of these crises will culminate into a civil war. You have an inflation crisis. You have Roe v. Wade being overturned, which pisses off a lot of the left. You have a lot of rapid conspiracy theories. You have both parties, saying that elections are fraudulent. You have an immigration crisis. All of the ingredients needed for a civil war. All of the ingredients for a civil war. And also, in the first civil war, you also had the immigration crisis from Ireland. Whereas if you didn't know that, there was an immigration crisis from Ireland as well. So yeah, I wonder what would happen under this new Republican government. But yeah, America would definitely have way less people if a civil war happened. Because of the casualties of war, and of course the starvation of cities, which a lot of people live in cities. Cities are the most populated regions in the world. I think that the Democrats would have way more casualties than the Republicans, considering the fact that they mostly live in cities. And why am I saying this? Because all you have to do is look at the map of the Republicans. Most of the Republican land is connected. The Democrat land is scattered throughout cities. And also Democrats control the most populated state in the country, California, which has 49 million people as well. And I think after this Civil War, I think you would see a Reconstruction era which would last around a decade. as well. And yeah, I think if the left lose the Civil War, which this would be a civil war of attrition, it would be a civil war of attrition. Said most likely because cities are pretty hard to take. For example, all you have to do is look at the siege of Stalingrad, the siege of Aleppo. It took years for the Battle of Aleppo to finally be over, and Stalingrad took a year for the Stalingrad battle to be over. And also, you'd have Republicans and Democrats fighting all areas and all fronts as well. Well, and yeah, the cities would have to be rebuilt first as well. So yeah. So yeah, if the economic collapse, I do think something pretty bad is gonna be happening at the end of this decade, to end the era of the globalists. I just, I just hope there's no nuclear Armageddon, because that would be way worse than the Civil War. Because around 90% of Americans will probably die from nuclear Armageddon, especially most people who are unprepared for an apocalypse. So yeah, that's what would happen if a second civil war would happen. Millions would die, and it would be one of the worst battle wars in history. So yeah, and that's basically all of this video. Goodbye.